So with me on the line today from her room is Dee Caffari, one of the legends of round the world racing, 6 times circumnavigator. Is that right, Dee?
That is right. Yeah, 6 times around the world now.
Now, there's a bit of a story on your wall relating to that. Just tell me what you got framed on the wall just above your head.
I know. So luckily my computer just fits in really nice, and just over my right shoulder are my certificates from Guinness World Records, of which there's 3. And then just over my left shoulder is a Pippa Blake original that was based on the start of the Vendée Globe. She was the godmother of my IMOCA 60, and she came out for the start, and my boyfriend, as a present to me when I finished the race, was to get Pippa to do an original painting from that day. So quite a lot of memories around me now.
Amazing, amazing. Now, I read your Facebook page last week. You had some fantastic tips for how to cope with isolation. Just firstly, give us the context of why you felt qualified to make that. For those that don't know your story, just tell us about those periods of isolation on which particular circumnavigations we're talking about.
Well, last week when I wrote that post, it was more a case of feeling a little sorry for myself and vulnerable that all my planned work and sailing for the year had literally disappeared within a couple of weeks, much like many people are experiencing. And then I had to kind of take stock of the situation and kind of look at the bigger picture. And I realized that I had experience of isolation that nobody else has probably had to the same extreme. And my first solo round the world was against the winds and currents in the Aviva Challenge. And that took me 178 days. So I, through choice, elected to spend 6 months on my own at sea. And then conversely, the next race around the world for me was the Vendée Globe, going what's considered the right way around the world. And it took half the time. But those 2 periods of having 6 months on your own and 3 months on your own, I thought was quite valuable. And maybe I should share some of the lessons learned and the frustrations I felt during that time, just to empower people and give them the confidence to deal with what we're all facing now in the next few weeks.
So having read that, I thought it'd be really nice to do an interview with you on that. And then, of course, I was beaten to the punch by Radio 4. So I'm listening yesterday morning to one of my favourite shows and my favourite broadcasters, Paddy O'Connell of Broadcasting House. And you cropped up and you were there offering your pearls of wisdom. So who asked who?
Well, I was amazed at the reach that this post had, and it got picked up in The Guardian, and it kind of got taken broader then, because obviously their reach is much bigger than my Facebook. And BBC asked me to come and comment on the Radio 4 show yesterday morning, and I've had some really nice comments from that. It was very short and sweet, but I was surprised at how many people listened to that programme, but equally how many people said nice things that I was sharing quite practical advice. So I think it's just come at a really good time, and it's from the heart, and I've been there, seen it, done it, and I want to give people confidence for the next few weeks or months ahead that we're going to face.
Now, one of the things that Paddy asked you, or one of the assumptions he seemed to make, was that maybe you were a special kind of person that was specially equipped for those kind of long solitary passages, and you know the offshore world better than I do. That strange world that you inhabit does attract some strange characters to which you would think would be very well suited to that kind of long-term isolation. You don't strike me as one of those people. You strike me as naturally gregarious. So there's me making an assumption. You've been around the world fully crewed. You've been around the world by yourself. What is your natural milieu?
It's an interesting one, and I don't really have a preference, but I'm not your average person that you would expect to spend long periods of time on their own. As you say, I'm quite a sociable person. I quite enjoy interacting with people and people's company. So to choose to spend that time on your own was something I had to learn how to do quite a lot. And it is quite funny the way you can kind of pigeonhole these adventurers or these solo sailors that go to the Arctic or go across oceans on their own, that they're quite insular, private people. But actually, my experience of them are all quite similar, really. It's just that you have to developed quite a strong mindset and a streak of stubbornness, maybe a bit of tenacity, and the challenge is all encompassing, and you kind of are so focused on getting it done that you find those skills that you need to do it. So when I compare my first round the world to my second solo around the world, so the 6 months isolation compared to the 3 months isolation, they're, you know, polar opposites. The first one, I was an emotional mess. I was learning how to do this all the time. I was laughing one minute, crying the next, and really struggling to manage myself 24/7 for 6 months. And then the transition I made when I went to the Vendée Globe and I went from being that adventurer to that professional racer, I was a completely different person, and I was much more able to manage myself and my emotions and focus my energies in the right place. And I learned lots of tips and skills to make that transition. And that's principally what I wanted to share with people when they're facing the isolation.
Okay, so what would your Vendée self have told your Aviva wrong way around the world self, with the benefit of hindsight? What do you wish that you'd known about your own behaviour before you headed off on the 100 and whatever it was, 180 odd days around the world by yourself?
Hey, don't add any more on. It's 178, all right? So that messaging actually is really interesting. So the big transition for me was the psychology of managing myself. And I underestimated the influence of food, good nutrition, hydration, and sleep, and the effect it has on your mood. And also that wasted energy. You know, being emotional about stuff is often, you know, quite a nice release, but it's also a lot of energy that you waste. And so the big transition for me was to focus on the things you can do something about, and don't waste your energy worrying and stressing over the things you can't influence at all. So for example, I'd be sailing around the world looking at that wind speed, looking at that number, getting higher and higher and getting really stressed, but I can't control the wind. I can only control my boat, my sails, what I'm doing. So it was a case of just really kind of managing that. And the other big take home for me was I was naturally a negative person. And I know that may surprise you, but my default setting was to say what I didn't want to happen. I didn't want to let people down, didn't want to embarrass myself, didn't want to come last. But I didn't have the ability to say what I did want to happen. And I had to really concentrate and work hard at changing my language to be positive language. And I also had to get those people that interacted with me to do the same. So instead of them telling me, oh, Andy Rice is going faster than you, doesn't help because I can't control what Andy Rice is doing. But if they said, are you happy with your boat speed? Have you got the right sails? You know, how are you feeling? And I could be, oh yeah, actually it's pretty good conditions. I could probably go up now and I need to push on a bit more. And it was all about focusing on my control rather than panicking about something that I can't have any control over at all.
So how aware were you of that when you headed out on the challenge? How much did you learn about that form of self-communication on the way round?
So sadly for me, the Aviva challenge was this emotional roller coaster, and the highs and lows were so extreme, and I just kind of dealt with it. But it wasn't until I had the support of the preparation of the Vendée Globe, using Leeds University to help me with the psychology and the physical and mental, nutritional, all the preparation involved, that I started to see those links and those habits that I'd created and having to change them. So when I set out for the Vendée Globe, I was in a much more positive space. I was really confident I could spend that much time on my own easily. I've practiced that. I knew the sailing would develop and I'd get better and better at controlling my boat and pushing it where it should be. And it was a case then of the psychological change that I'd made had the biggest impact. So I underestimated the power of sports psychology, and now I would put it right up there. If I was to comment to somebody of how they could help upskill themselves, I'd be like, don't forget the mental side of things and the preparation you can do to help you with that.
So with the world in the turmoil that it is right now and so many unknowns, we don't know how long this is going to go on for. We don't know how many of us will survive at the end of it. These are big, big questions that many of us are having to face for the first time in our lives. How have you been talking to yourself in the last week in terms of that negative voice and that positive voice?
It's really important now. I don't allow that negative voice in, and I can feel it now. And you're kind of feeling a bit vulnerable or a bit frustrated. It's very easy to let that voice in. But for me now, and the message I'm trying to share is control the controllables. So in your day, you want a routine. You want to concentrate on your hydration, make sure you're eating as healthy as you can. And don't forget the other things that used to make you feel good. So we can't go to the gym, but get out in your garden. We want the challenge of, that kind of day-to-day work life that we had before. And so maybe it's time to learn a new skill. And it's really interesting the way we talk about all this time that we now have on our hands. And it's like, well, make sure we use it. Don't let this period of time pass you by and nothing's actually changed. And you feel like, oh, I've wasted all that time. So, all those jobs that you were putting off for another time, well, maybe it's time to write that jobs list and tick them off one by one. And you don't have to go hell for leather all into it. You don't have to paint the whole house in one day. But if you can start chipping away at different things and working your way methodically through a jobs list as part of your routine that you set yourself day to day, it gives you structure, it gives you purpose, and it gives you self-worth so that you can keep yourself very positive and forward thinking without trying to lose your mind to try and create what you think might happen in 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, however long this is going to go on for.
I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning and it takes me a while, maybe a few moments before I realize I'm in my own dystopian sci-fi movie, far more interactive than I would like it to be. What frame of mind do you initially wake up in when you remember what the world is like right now?
You do have to take a deep breath because it isn't anything that any of us have experienced before. And you have to think, okay, so what is today going to bring? And it is good to have the news and the input, but not 24/7, because you can't listen to that 24/7. It will just have too much impact on you. So manage your exposure to the truths and the realities and the education that we've been given, but focus on the good things. So I get up and I walk my dog in the morning while I still can. And, the weather's changing, which is a breath of fresh air for everybody. So kind of appreciate what you've got and then structure your day. And I think it's a case of, you could get a bit lost of, oh, well, I could just stay in my pajamas and lie on the couch. And it's quite hard to force yourself that every day isn't a Sunday. We're trying to make the world continue. And a lot of people have got, fears over their business and their futures. And so it's that time maybe to think of how you can reinvent things, how you can adapt to this change. And those that adapt better will fare better in the long term. So it is going to be tough, and, there's no denying that. But it's having structure and trying to have purpose. So one of the little jobs I've done is a fair few of my friends have got children now at home, wanting to do some schooling, or they're trying to manage that work from home and homeschooling balance. So I've offered to send, they have a 30-minute slot where they have to answer the questions that I've sent them. So that's like a little job that I've given myself that I can send out to my friends, and they can then impart that onto their kids as part of their learning and schooling at home. So you can create kind of jobs and fill your day quite easily. And the big thing for me is I don't want to get through this period and feel that I haven't taken advantage of it.
And what new skills are you going to equip yourself with during this time?
Well, we can all fantasize. We're all going to learn another language. I'm going to learn to play the guitar. I'm going to have singing lessons, all these things that you think would be lovely. The reality is maybe I'll get on top of my garden, and maybe I might paint a few things in my house. But actually, for me personally, I really want to make sure I try and keep my fitness, because it's very easy to let that go. I need quite a lot of external influence in my life to get me to do things. So going to the gym was one of those things. And of course, now there's not a reason to put your gear on or go to the gym and have someone tell you what to do. You've got to find that motivation yourself. So I've got to really draw on what I learned going around the world to make sure I discipline myself that every day I'm doing something, and I'm going to up my fitness levels while I can just focus on that and not get distracted.
And I'll just check in on the time, because by the time this goes up on YouTube, the world might have changed again. So it's midday on Monday, the 23rd of March here in the UK. Right now, we're still able to go for a walk in the bright sunshine. And yesterday, it seemed like the whole country went out for a walk and maybe didn't respect this 2 meter separation between us. And I fear that we might lose that freedom quite soon. How well have you prepared yourself for that?
Well, the reality from seeing some of the images from the weekend where people didn't really take the social distancing into account, they just got excited by good weather and the weekend. And it's almost kind of that spring break frenzy where this might be our last chance, we've got to go and make the most of it, may have cost us that freedom that we were enjoying. So I think it's, you know, hours, if not days, before we start to see some of the measures we've seen in Europe already. And as a result of that, I'm kind of thinking that I maybe should have gone shopping. But so on the jobs list, well, even shopping's not that easy either. So on the jobs list is to kind of plan for, okay, how prepared are we if we can't go out, and what measures are they going to take, and how severe is it going to be?
Now, how long have you had your dog?
I call him a puppy, but he's 10 years old now. He's experienced 4 around the worlds with me. So he's beside himself that he's had so long with me at home. So I can't tell if he's still excited or whether he's thinking, surely you must be going away now, Mum.
Anyway, you got this dog a long time before we knew that we were headed into what we are now. But my son is confined to his quarters in Madrid, where things are pretty bad right now. So he's not been allowed out of his apartment for the last 8 or 9 days. I hear that in Spain, people are loaning out their dogs because the only excuse you've got to go out, apart from going to the shop to get some necessary foods, is to take the dog for a walk. So the poor old dogs, they've always been sitting there at the door with a leash waiting to go for 1 walk a day. Now they're being taken for 6 walks a day by 6 different people. So we'll see. You could suddenly start to become very popular with the neighbours if you're the excuse that they need to get outside to walk your dog.
We are going to have the fittest dogs ever. We're going to have the prettiest gardens, the fittest dogs. There's lots of positives to be taken from this, but it's a case of, you know, Mother Nature's pressed the reset button. We're all paying for it now, but I think it's time as well for us to take stock long term for what the world post this period is going to look like, because we can't go back to how it was before.
So what crystal balling would you like to do on that? I mean, just pick out one thing that you think will never be the same again.
I think the realization of the impact of reduced travel has had and reduced industry has had on the environment is massive. I mean, I can look outside now and the sky is clear, it's bright, you can see for miles. There's no entrails in the sky because there's no flights anywhere. And I think this is having a huge impact. And if we were to go straight back to where we were before, I'm thinking we're not taking advantage of the lessons learned from this. And if we can maybe try and have an environmental conversation at the same time as the pandemic, so that we come out the other side with a better way of doing things going forwards.
So do you think that coronavirus is nature's way of telling us that we haven't been paying enough attention to Greta Thunberg?
I think this pandemic is a sign of Mother Nature definitely having a word. You know, she's been prompting by showing signs, and everyone was starting the conversation, but no one had really taken action. And it does feel to me that this is a big kick in the face. If you're not going to take action, then Mother Nature will, and we're paying the price for it. But so we kind of need to take advantage of using this as a period of time to maybe change things for the future. It would be lovely, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but there's a lot of clever people out there that would have some ideas, and if we could get them to collaborate online and come up with these ideas, and while there's time and space and capacity to do it, how great would that be?
Well, the TED talk that's surfacing a lot at the moment is Bill Gates' doom-laden prediction that we were headed for this kind of scenario, and he gave that TED talk about 5 years ago. So no doubt most epidemiologists or virologists have probably been shouting in the wind for the past 10 or more years that we were headed for one of these. It's probably well known within their scientific circles that statistically we were likely to be getting one of these, but I'm sure we'd be paying a lot more attention to them, and should have paid more attention to Bill Gates at the time. I feel like our priorities are changing, and one thing I hope for is that maybe the pin-ups of the future, the celebrities, won't be so much Kim Kardashian or footballers, and I don't blame footballers for who they are or what they do, but I think people might start to think that yes, maybe the footballers were overpaid and the nurses weren't paid enough. I'd like to see this produce some kind of change in terms of how we perceive our fellow men and women and the jobs that they do.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a real good sign of that is the current, kind of list of the key workforce people. Our key workers are all those jobs that are giving an invaluable service right now, but they're none of the richest list. They're none of our people that get paid a fortune. And so you're dead right that if we can't readdress this balance or realize which key people serve our communities more than others, for sure we need to kind of have a look at that. The fact that we've got all these carers working in quite critical conditions and they're not really being supported as well as they should. I think it really does kind of wake people up to that, maybe.
But what you said earlier about how the environment is improving because of less travel, what implication for the kinds of jobs that you and I do? I mean, can we seriously consider going back to the kind of high level of travel kind of jobs that you and I have been doing for the last 10 or 20 years?
Well, I mean, it does make us quite hypocritical when you say one thing and then you fly out to go and sail somewhere nice. But it's I think we just need to look at it. And I think the shutdown over China, I think, cleared the air and balanced those carbon emissions that the fires in Australia had produced. So that was kind of back to zero. And now we're looking at even more of a shutdown with a lot of airlines taking their flights away. It's like, well, do we need as many flights? The fact that flights are so cheap, it almost encourages more people to fly. And our alternative transport network isn't suitable and is too expensive for people to use as an option, I think does speak volumes to us. And I think, we maybe need to think about what we say compared to what we do. And, we sail and harness the power of nature in huge carbon fiber, high technology machines cooked in ovens. And, we don't hide it. And it is that technology that will develop faster and look for alternatives. But I think we need to be very honest and open in how we do stuff. And the airlines need to maybe take this time to come back in a different guise. Can they have plastic-free flights? Can they look at different fuel systems? Can we reduce our number of flights that we need? It's a time for them to take stock, because there's the capacity to think rather than having to run it at 100% and try and look for these alternatives.
So do you think we've seen the golden era of flight? Has it come and gone? The last 100 years was it, and we're back to something pre the Wright brothers, or somewhere in between the two, maybe?
I mean, the reality is we're going to go back, and I think there's almost going to be an explosion at the end of this of everybody kind of overcompensating and going everywhere and doing everything as much as they can. But I think, it'd be nice to think that we could think for the future. They always say that every 100 years something really big happens and we'll have a big blow. And I think we need to address what we're doing so that in 100 years' time, it's not quite as catastrophic for the future generations as it is now for us.
I'm just wondering, at the end of the Aviva Challenge or the Vendée, those long periods of isolation, you're coming to the end, and you know that there's going to be a vast crowd of people waiting to cheer you in, and in amongst them will be your friends and family and your most loved ones. What did you enjoy and cherish most about your isolation, and coming towards the end of that think, oh, I'm going to miss this when I go back to the real world?
The big takeaway for me on those trips was actually having that space to think. And I think in our everyday world, we are always immediately available. So technology allows us to be available night and day, 24/7, and everybody wants a response now. And I think when you have that environment offshore, there's a slight delay. There is technology there, but you have much more time and space to yourself. And that ability to allow you to process things, to think about things, to plan, to kind of set your goals and aspirations for the future is really invaluable. And I missed that when I came back. You come back to this whirlwind again where everything happens 24/7 and everybody wants an answer now. And you almost feel overwhelmed. It's like sensory overload. And I really valued then my dog walks. And that to me now is still my time to process and to think and to plan and to prioritize, kind of mentally do my lists so that I can come back and be productive and kind of just take stock before I get involved in everything again. And I think, people don't have a lot of that. And I think if you can create that time, it's really valuable if you learn how to use it. And I think now we're in an environment where people are being forced to have that time. And I really hope people take stock and make use of that me time and value themselves to allow them to have those thought processes, do the things for themselves that make them feel better. And it's all part of that well-being and mindfulness as well that is very topical, but let people actually start practicing it, and they will come out much more even, people on even keels that are much more able to cope with the pressures as we go back into full speed life, hopefully at the other side of this.
I almost want to wrap it up there, but I just remembered control of the controllables, because you sort of alluded to that just then as well without saying it. But this control, only think about the things that you can control, and try not to worry about all the other stuff that you can't control. So it's a really nice message, but it's sometimes easier said than done. How did you teach yourself to only concern yourself with the things that you could change and control?
Well, it's really interesting because you don't even realize you're doing it half the time, and you can feel yourself getting wound up. And it sometimes takes someone external to say to you, what are you upset about? What are you winding yourself up about? Now, at the moment, with people going into isolation, you haven't got that external person. So you almost have to have a conversation with yourself, talk to yourself and look in the mirror and just say, what is winding you up? And too often it's quite hard to admit what those things are. But then if you do speak out loud, you realize that, oh, actually, there's only 2 of those lists of 5 that I can actually influence or do anything about. So let's extract the things I can't control, concentrate on the things you can control, and you feel much more in control of your life. You feel much more able to manage because you've identified that you can actually affect change on some things. And I think that's really good for people's well-being.
Dee, absolutely wonderful to catch up with you on this subject. So glad that the wider media picked up on this as well. Thanks for sharing it. And I think you got some wonderful advice there for all of us to carry through for however long this takes. So I wish you the best. And I know that for as long as possible, you'll be out walking the dog. And let's hope that that lasts for many more days and months beyond this.
For sure, fingers crossed. And I'll continue to work on having a pretty garden and a very happy, healthy, fit dog.
Dee, lovely to catch up, and I hope we get to do it again soon sometime.
Thanks.